What we're going to talk about today is portfolio parent partnering and driving the landing pipeline. Again, my name is Lee Sessions. I'm with the Global Corporate Venturing Institute. I manage our ecosystem for corporate venture capital and our network of experts, amongst other things. I'm also a course instructor. And prior to working with the Global Corporate Venturing Institute, I was with Intel Capital in a role leading our portfolio development team. So I am pleased to facilitate this topic with some outstanding panelists, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a few minutes. We have Adria Kinnear from Incutel and Swati from the National Grid Partners, NGP, and has a background that she'll tell you a little bit more about with a number of other companies. But I'm very privileged and excited about having such exceptional experts with us today to talk about this topic. And to provide just a little bit of context for the topic, one of the reasons that corporate venturing is so interesting and so challenging is because of the complex and interdependent ecosystem that we have to operate within, where we have hundreds and hundreds of relationships and touch points throughout the entire investing process. And that includes both internal networks and external stakeholders that requires a great deal of translation and communication across various touch points. Different organizations internally and externally may even speak different business languages and have different expectations and mindsets. So there's a great deal of coordination in order to make this all kind of come together. And there's been a growing recognition of the importance of having both the investing role and the landing role in organizations for them to be successful in realizing the value that comes from engaging with startups. It's not just the investment capital, but it's also all of the work that goes into landing that value. In the most recent Keystone survey, the data shows that over 40% of global CVCs have a corporate venture business development team, a platform team we call them. And 80% of those teams offer access to their parent partners and networks and technical resources as part of what they do to help the startup companies be successful. So a lot of what we're talking about here is things that companies do to accelerate portfolio success. Over half have some sort of a PMO, project management office, and resources and funding for pilots and proof of concepts. And we'll hear about that from some experts who have dealt with ways to help systematically move from proof of concept to commercialization and so on. So I think that one of the things that makes this process so successful and so effective is when organizations approach the work from an end-to-end process in which they look at the entire process of moving from deciding what you're going to invest in to how you invest and how you actually land that value. So the dark line in the center represents the trajectory that you would see that organizations go through. And there's an interesting interplay that occurs between the investors or the investment team, the CVBD or platform team, and the business unit and functional areas in the company that are helping to land that. And so if you look at that whole end-to-end process and how they manage the relationship with the portfolio companies, you can see that there may be any number of roles and potential contributions depending on which phase of the process it is. This process is also, while we've depicted it as a linear process, it's not linear. It's a very much an iterative process that may change over time. And it's something that requires a great deal of coordination. And it's also a shared responsibility. So what we see is that if you look across that whole process and at each stage of the process, from onboarding to engaging with a startup to working through some sort of a proof of concept or a pilot or a commercial rollout or scale, there's a number of factors to take into account. And you could actually take the time to answer these types of questions about each of the phases that would enable you to better kind of think through what are the implications and what is it that the portfolio company would need? What is it that the startup company would need to do? The corporate parent would need to do in order to achieve the objectives at each stage. And so this is something that is really an important part of landing that value, and alignment is really the key. And if you see there, I guess maybe the next thing to talk about here is when you think about your program design, is also taking into account the needs of the startup. And different startups, as you know, are in different stages of readiness. So this is yet another layer of complexity to take into account. Is, for a seed stage company, you're really kind of testing, how the, at a very simple level, testing, how does it work with the market? Is this going to be technically viable? And then you move into, a later stage where you're talking about, operational prototyping and doing a pilot. And yet again, if you move into like a commercial trial, you're really starting to scale things. And so depending on startup readiness, sometimes an organization may have more resources to bear than the entire startup. So you have to kind of figure out, what I would call kind of not too early, not too late, not too large of an engagement, not too small of an engagement, to see if it really works. Is kind of looking for that Goldilocks moment where everything is just right to try to make things work. And with the different stages of companies and the different complexity of large corporations that are engaging with startups, obviously that adds a layer of complexity that can make things kind of challenging. So that is just a brief introduction to get us started with this topic. And I am very pleased to welcome our two panelists. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their background, their organizations, and then we're going to go into some questions. And I will also entertain questions from the audience. So if you have questions later, once we get going, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. And we will try to address those as we go. And we will be sharing a video summary of this material and a write-up in the Global Corporate Venturing website. So why don't we start with Swati? Would you care to go first?
Thanks, Lee. So I'm Swati. I'm with National Grid Partners. National Grid Partners is the corporate venture investment and innovation group of National Grid. National Grid is one of the largest global investor-owned utilities, headquartered in the UK, and we also serve Massachusetts and New York as our jurisdictions in the US. NGP has invested $450 million across 43 startups since 2018, which was our inception, and we've had 7 exits in that time frame. In terms of our structure, we have 7 investors, and we have more than double that in our business development, venture acceleration, and innovation teams, which is our platform team. Our charter is to drive external innovation and digital transformation from external startups into the company. That's what we're looking to do. And 80% of our portfolio needs to be engaged with National Grid. So we look at that metric quite a bit. My role, I've had a number of roles on what we're calling the platform side. I started in business development, and that was a lot about sourcing deals and driving engagement with the business units, understanding their needs. I've then subsequently moved to leading an innovation board in the company, which is with our executives looking at startups for Horizon 3 innovation. And now I lead something called Next Grid Alliance. This is an alliance of 100+ utilities globally. And the focus is, how do we leverage startups and external innovation for the energy transition to accelerate it? Because no one company will be able to innovate alone. It requires collaboration and innovation. This is a huge differentiator for us and our firm, because our portfolio gets access to National Grid, but also this alliance and network of 100+ utilities. Prior to National Grid, I was in a similar role at Siemens, and prior to that with IBM Venture Capital Group, I started my venture career at SoftBank. Pause there, Lee.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you very much. I should have mentioned that, one of the things that led us to invite Swati and Adria is, their personal experience, which obviously is very deep, as Swati just said, but also their organizations have really embraced portfolio development and as part of their culture. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that happened. But first, let's get to know Adria.
Hey, good morning, Lee and Swati and everyone online. It's great to be here today with you all. My name is Adria Kinnear, and I'm the Vice President of Portfolio Success at IQT. IQT is the strategic investor that the United States intelligence community has relied upon for exactly 25 years this year to accelerate the introduction of cutting-edge technologies that contribute to national security. In this role at IQT, I oversee the execution of our startup investments and the transfer of the technologies so as to maximize the impact for our government agencies that we serve. I've been at IQT for 6 years, and I've been leading this team for about 3. A little bit of background on IQT. IQT was established in 1999, 25 years ago, in response to the movement of advanced technology R&D out of the government and into the private sector. This was both in dollars and in personnel. So brains were leaving the government to go add value to the technology boom that was happening outside the government at a time when also mobility and privacy was more of a demand. Essentially, a group of very clever individuals and officials with inside the USG figured out a way to ensure that the US intel agencies could still have access to innovative technologies from the growing startup community. And this was done by connecting these 3 diverse ecosystems in order to, identify, research, cultivate new tech, and support the safety and security of the US and its allies. And so this ecosystem consists of the national security community, the venture community, and the startup community. Now, fast forward to today, IQT is a prolific investor, global investor, with more than 700 investments across 36 states and 15 countries. We also have served about 10 US government agencies. Our products, though, that have been modified within our programs, though, I believe have proliferated around other agencies as well, but our core focus has been on 10. We have 3 offices domestically, one outside of Boston, one in Tysons Corner, Virginia, outside of DC, which is where I'm sitting. And then we have a Menlo Park office out in California. And then abroad, we now have 4 offices in London, Munich, Singapore, and Sydney. IQT invests in a wide range of technology areas, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, biotechnology, communications, autonomous systems, power and energy, materials and electronics, cybersecurity, and space. So we really touch lots of different areas for a variety of different customers.
That's great. Well, and I know, for both of your organizations from day one, both In-Q-Tel and NGP has been focused on, accelerating this portfolio development or value in terms of engagement between the parent company and the startups that you invest in. I know, Swati, you mentioned also when we were talking earlier that it's not just investment, but you engage with startups that you don't invest in. But I guess right. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what is your CVC model for parent engagement and portfolio support? How does that model work? And maybe you could, Swati, if you wouldn't mind going first, tell me a little bit about the capabilities and roles that are so important for you to achieve your charter.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we have 7 investors on the team. And when we set this up, there was a lot of attention paid to how will we capture strategic value for the company, not just do the investment. And I think there was a recognition that the investment role is very demanding, the board management, et cetera, it takes a lot of time. So we needed to have some dedicated business development team inside National Grid Partners. And then we also couple that with this Next Grid Alliance. So our secret sauce, our platform really consists of both of those things, the business development team and the Next Grid Alliance team. On the business development side, that job, we are organized by business unit. So each member has a business unit that they work with. That job is to really understand the business pain points deeply, the challenges, the innovation priorities. It's to build champions and engagement with the business heads there, as well as the teams. It's to then work with the investors to identify the areas they should be focusing on so we can bring those kind of companies in. And then once we invest, it's really to drive a deep engagement, whether that's a POC pilot et cetera, because as I mentioned, our requirement is 80% of our portfolio has to be engaged in some sort with National Grid, whether that's eyes and ears, POC, pilot, deployment. We think of that upfront at the time we invest, right? Even before investment. Oftentimes we're thinking about that many months before we decide on the investment. Because we're looking at, so our criteria for investing is strategic return and value capture, as well as financial. So at that time, we'd have to be sure that we have a plan in place to do both, right? To have that strategic engagement. That's the business development part. And it's very, very important. You know, we really strive to differentiate ourselves for the portfolios that we offer that support, because on their own, it would be just too difficult to navigate. On the Next Grid Alliance side, the Next Grid Alliance is a platform on its own. On one side, you have utilities. On one side, you have startups. So here, what the promise is the energy transition needs collaboration. It needs innovation. And we're going to help our startups with that on one side, and we're going to help our utility partners on the other side. Utilities don't compete with each other. So we're in different jurisdictions. And so there's a legacy of sharing and collaborating on innovation. Right. And so here we don't have as much control in terms of POCs, pilots, but we have programs in place to drive deep engagement. So we have things like technology days where we go to a utility and we customize our portfolio to the discussion that they want. We have working groups where we really look deeply into an innovation area, startups and utilities together, figure out how to solve it, figure out if there's a collaboration. We have our annual summit, which is a thought leadership, networking, who's in energy annual event. All those things are programs, but what they're designed to do is drive that deep engagement. So this whole, our model works as a system. The investors get the gaps and the challenges from the business development team and the Next Grid Alliance team. They invest, and then once the investment is made, you know, both those teams help to engage startups and scale them up. So as Lee, as you said, we had a picture of a linear set of activities, but they really are iterative and work as a system.
That's great. Well, I have so many questions, and I appreciate that some of the attendees have submitted some questions in the Q&A that we'll get to in a few minutes. But first, just to kind of lay the groundwork for this, I would like to hear from Adria a little bit about how InQtel's program of engagement is organized.
Sure. So our mission at IQT is to be the premier partner trusted to identify, evaluate, and leverage technologies for the national security community. And I think at the core of this approach sits our like clear understanding that we need to really understand what the needs are and of the group that we're investing on behalf of. Like, what exact problems are we trying to solve for? And this becomes particularly inherently maybe a little bit more difficult because it is the intelligence community who is very sort of, they hold these things close, they hold these close to their chest. But we strive very hard to understand, you know, what are their problems, what are we trying to solve for, and what do their hopes and dreams look like for a solution? We want to be able to deliver on that. And so to be able to get to this deep understanding, most of our staff has security clearances, which helps a lot. So the people doing the work at the very beginning have very deep technical expertise, but then also have the security clearance to be able to go inside the building, sit with the end users and ask them, you know, what do you really need and why? And then once we have a clear understanding of the problems we're trying to solve for, then our investment team reaches out to the startup community to find these like needle in a haystack startups whose offerings could be close solutions to the USG's problems, but then if modified, could maybe be complete solutions. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. The number of startups our team talks to over the course of a year is in the upper like hundreds, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of startups. And then another key component of our investment approach is that we have within each government agency an established office that is staffed with active USG personnel who are a key partner in the success of it all, because they are the ones who put the people who need our help most in front of us. And if it wasn't for them, we would not be as successful at really getting to the crux of the issues. And then you have my team, which is the portfolio success team, who steps in to lead once IQT and the USG have agreed to make an investment into a startup to modify their technologies to work inside the IC. On our team, we wear many hats in order to drive the success of these investments. And at a high level, we manage all the tasks required to deliver a positive outcome to all of the stakeholders involved in this relationship. And the outcome of this could be a direct multi-year contract for a startup who, prior to IQT, maybe never would have even considered the federal government or the IC as a potential customer. This could also be, a sophisticated data analytic tool that previously was cloud dependent, but now works in an air-gapped environment, decreasing the amount of time an analyst needs to do their job. So one other factor that I think is important in all of this is that when we are working with the startups, we have a team here called the project engineering team, and they are sort of a go-between to take a first look at the startups' technologies and evaluate them before handing them over to the government to use on their side. So there's actually like a technical due diligence piece that happens real time over the course of our work with startups and the government that plays a key role in best positioning the technology to do what it's supposed to do once it gets in the hands of the person who asked for it.
Okay. So there's so much there that I want to ask more about it. The first thing that comes to mind, though, is how do you know when a startup is ready, to engage with a business or an agency? I can just imagine, the stakes are pretty high on these things. So, how do these collaboration expectations relate to the startup development and, eyes and ears versus a work program, for example?
Yeah, so I think it depends. We're not reaching out too early in a startup's life cycle and not too late either. I think it really depends on what we're looking for. But I think if the company has a strong technology that passes our due diligence and they have the financial runway, the resources to do the work, and then the ability to to make room for this in their planning. I think oftentimes the asks that we have of these startups are usually for enhancements to their product that maybe they have scheduled in their pipeline for 2 years out. And when we make the investment in them, they're able to pull in that schedule and get the modifications done early using the money that we've put into the contract. And so it really is it's a bit of a dance. Oftentimes, almost every day I read about interviews that our team has with startups that are just too early, or they're not quite ready, or they're still doing something to just kind of get their legs under them that doesn't make them a good partner. So.
And Swati, do you find you have to modify your approach based on the stage of the startups?
Yeah, definitely. I think we have to modify our approach. But I'll tell you, I'll add a little bit of insight into this that's different, which is definitely stage is a factor for how you engage. But I think a direct applicability to your business also defines that. So I'll give some examples. We had a very early stage startup. This is working in the area of high temperature superconductors, evaporative cooling technology. What does all that mean? We run transmission and distribution networks. And so as with renewables, we need to increase the capacity of those networks. So this startup and technology was directly applicable to increasing capacity. Very important, critical for us, but very early stage. It was a Series A. We actually signed a collaboration agreement with that startup before they even had a product. And we didn't take an investment. The reason is we wanted to really help with our engineering expertise, help the startup make sure they are going to accelerate their go-to-market, help them demo in the US and the UK, and really help their chances of success. Why? Because if they succeed, it could be a game changer, not only for National Grid, but for the industry. We were that intrigued. And so we actually very quickly signed an agreement with them, and they're very early stage pre-product. Second example I'll give, an AI and satellite vegetation management company. Vegetation management, as you all know, very, very important for utilities, right? For some utilities, depending on the size, could be hundreds of millions of dollars of annual expense. For other utilities, could be as high as billions, depending on where you are in the country. directly applicable to digital transformation, operational efficiency. Again, Series A startup this time, we took an investment. We did a POC with them in Massachusetts. They won a contract in Massachusetts. And that is all possible because when we started with them, they had just one other customer. So once we made the investment, we were able to help them scale. In contrast, I'll give you an example of another company we have in the portfolio, Enterprise AI company. We invested at Series C. There were already 200 people in the company. However, because AI is emerging, because AI and energy applications are emerging, it's a horizontal technology, it took some time for that engagement. Now we're engaged with them after a couple of years. So engagement depends on stage, very definitely, but it also depends on the applicability to the business, the direct fit with the business.
And so I can imagine there that in some cases, the businesses are more eager to engage than others. And I have to say, we've got so many questions. I'm gonna have to start, going through some more of the questions from the audience. We really appreciate these. So one of the questions is, how do you programmatically, kind of manage these relationships, especially, where you have multiple, with your alliance, Swati, you have multiple, different companies actually, and for Adria, completely different agencies. But how do you manage all these relationships and make sure that they're committed to working with the portfolio company? Is it a formal process? Is it an informal process? Who wants to go first?
You want me to go first, Lee?
Sure, Adria, please.
Okay, so I guess this is why we have two different teams. So we have a business development team that is really organized by business unit. And what we found in National Grid is there are cases when we have a startup engaging with multiple business units, but it has been serial. So we really try to identify where the low-hanging fruit and the timing is right for a quick engagement. We get that engagement and really try to show the success so that builds confidence with other business units inside National Grid. Outside National Grid, again, we're organized by utility partner. So we can at any one time have one startup engage with multiple entities and multiple business development and venture acceleration people. That's true. So far, it has been pretty systematic just because the programs are very well defined how to engage. So we haven't had a problem of, just chaos of time or too many opportunities. It's gone pretty smoothly. I think the key to that is the two distinct teams and the relationship management.
Okay, and I don't know if Adria, you're on mute, but if you can unmute yourself, that'd be great. And do you have the same thing? You have a formal process, informal process, different teams?
Yeah, so I think probably as a function of the fact that we've been doing this for 25 years, we've had 25 years to learn how to try to apply a formula to this that works, even though it changes every time we do it. But essentially, we have a statement of work that gets signed between In-Q-Tel and the startup at the beginning of our investment, and so that guides the programmatics of how the work is done. It's the portfolio successes team's job to drive the playbook and ensure that all the stakeholders know what to expect and to keep everyone on the same page throughout the work program that we have. Similar to Swati, we work very hard to nurture the relationships with the startups and the U.S. government partners, and always just stay focused on what we're trying to achieve through the work program effort, because at the end of the day, this is science and engineering, and we're exploring areas that have never been explored before by the startups and the industry. So we expect that it's not going to go exactly as we plan every time, and being able to deal with that. But then also we are around for the life cycle of the investment. So I think when we invest and do the due diligence, we don't just sign the contract and walk away and pray that it goes well. we're there with check-ins every week. We do larger check-ins throughout the work program to make sure that all the key stakeholders are tracking what's happening, sort of anticipating any hurdles or roadblocks that may be coming towards us. And I think if everything's going well, we consider what can be done to make things go even better. But if there are things that are not going well, we apply resources and further diagnose how to get things back on track of that statement of work, but always very involved with all stakeholders on a daily, if not weekly basis throughout the entire life cycle.
That's great. So some of the follow-up questions I want to ask is, so Swati, you mentioned that you measure engagement between the startup and NGP. What constitutes the 80%? What does that mean?
Yeah, 80% means there has to be some kind of engagement, whether it's eyes and ears, POC, pilot, or deployment. And actually, I just refer back to what Adria said. I should have mentioned, at the time of investment, we also have a letter of support from a specific business. So typically we start with whichever business has that letter of support, in terms of that's where we start the engagement, and then we build on from that. So that helps guide sort of the order, and it's not as formal as a contract, but we have a very good idea of where we're going to start. Okay, so the great. 80% is, do we have that engagement? And we count, how many we have, and then we have the total portfolio. And where we're more involved is the early POCs, right? So one of the things is our business is a regulated business. So all of our startups have to go through RFP process and et cetera, which are the rules of utility. However, we're involved very much in the beginning for quick validations, quick POCs, the lighter engagements, because that really builds confidence and it shows what can be done and what's real. And then throughout the process, as the engagement gets more, we continue to evangelize, we continue to show the art of the possible, we continue to work with the business units. So we definitely count POC, pilot, deployment, and each of the startups, 80% have to have at least one form.
That's great. Engagement. Well, so and then for those that don't have a deployment, or maybe where there is no clear partnership, how do you measure the impact of learnings?
Yeah. So for the 20%, yeah. So the 20%. So for example, some of the things that I just said about the startup in high temperature superconductors, we have collaboration agreement. That's actually not an investment, so it doesn't count for the 20%. But the 20%, the learning, it would be a little bit more informal. It would be more sort of the feedback from the business units, the programs that we've done together, maybe with Next Grid Alliance. Okay. What we want to do with the 20% is within 2 years get them engaged. So we would never invest in something that can't go from pathfinding, we really say pathfinding, into engagement. So there's always, and we'd like to do it within the 2-year time frame. And the reason is some of the segments are evolving, or the startup is really way too early.
Okay, that's great. So I guess if you have anything to add, Adria, or I'm going to move on to another question here in just a second, which is you guys have talked about these programs and how well they're working, but I got to ask, I'm sure that mistakes were made at some point and things didn't all go so rosy. That's life. Can you tell me about any mistakes that your organization made during your evolution to CVC platforms, things that didn't work, and maybe some lessons learned from something that didn't go as planned?
I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. I think that this is kind of like the daily life. Things always kind of don't go as planned, and we have to kind of embrace the discomfort with that. I think that because of the fact that our end user base of the US government is across so many different agencies of all different sizes, that there are just so many external factors that can play a role, like geopolitical events, can affect budget spend on, a development effort that's been taking place for a number of years, and then something tragic happens on the other side of the world, and an entire office's budget has to shift to address that, whereas originally it had been marked to purchasing a new technology. So I feel like perhaps giving grace to the team, that in our case, there are so many external factors that could derail something, that we have to be able to accept it and just keep moving forward towards the next one. And then also, as I said before about the communication piece, because we are in such lockstep with the startups and the government end users, I find that, the team does deliver a lot of maybe quote unquote bad news, but it's not bad news when you're delivering it to a friend who's been tracking all along all of the risks and all the ways that your team has been de-risking this investment.
Yeah. Okay. So, Swati, anything to add from your?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, we didn't understand the complexity of the different processes inside the company, and so early on, very early, we jumped on a couple of deals. We had a letter of support from the business unit, and we jumped on the deal. There are things like digital transformation groups, IT groups in the company. They have their own plans, and so it's sort of, the one thing in a utility is the processes are very, very important, and standardization of processes, IT processes are very important. We didn't see the complexity of that, and so it took much longer for those startups to get engaged. So now we've really shifted to really trying to understand those roadblocks and/or areas where we could get stuck, or areas it doesn't fit. Maybe it fits a business unit plan, but it doesn't fit maybe the digitalization transformation plans. And we really work hard up front to identify, spot those, communicate with the startup, and have a plan in place.
Okay, that's great. And as you're talking here about your process and your challenges, it sounds like you've got your landing pipeline has a variety of different touch points. I'm curious about how your process may change over time if you're moving, like, say, from a POC to a commercial pilot and rollouts, and like who pays for what, and and then we also have lots of questions about metrics. But let me just start with kind of real briefly, what's your basic process like, and is it different early versus late stage?
Yeah, we as I mentioned, we have very strong processes in the company. As a utility, we are a process company, right? That's what we do. And it's very important, I would say, for the venture team, when you put your effort together, to think about how the venture team activities can be built into the processes of the company and not disturb them, right? And it takes some thought to really figure that out. As I mentioned, we are very involved early in the process, early POCs, pilots. Our business units pay for everything. It's a regulated utility. They have to have the spending planned for it. So but our role is program manager, evangelizer, art of the possible, really educating procurement, educating the business unit, and staying with the startup and the engagement so things don't fall. We're probably the only ones doing that to make sure things aren't falling, right? But our business units have a big role in it. They're ultimately, when it gets from POC to pilot or deployment, that goes through our RFP process. We're a little bit out of that. That is run by our procurement teams and our business units.
Okay. And Adria, any comments from you in terms of how that works? I don't even know if it's the same across different agencies.
Yeah, I mean, in general, because of the statement of work for an effort with a startup is the same for all of the USG participants on that effort. So I think initially, you have as far as, like, I think you'd asked how the roles shift over time. Initially, you have a all hands on deck situation, right, where the investment team member and the technical team and the program management team or the portfolio success team are all really just trying to get things off to the races. But then over time, when the startup delivers its first modifications of its technology to us, it's really the program managers and the project engineers who are working closely with evaluating that technology, making sure it meets the mark, and then working very closely with the government to make sure that they're able to pilot it in their workflow and take it for a test drive. And then with subsequent deliveries of further modifications, really doing a lot of support and also sort of filling in a key role in the feedback loop back to the startup, because we do look at, oftentimes some of our government end users are sort of like product managers for the startups, because they are working on giving feedback on a brand new product that the startup is exploring. And so we make sure that we keep the feedback moving, and then also to helping the government once they decide that they're going to adopt this technology into their work long term, then we support them in any way we can to help them with that process. Although we do not do the contracting, but we give them all the things that they need to be able to get that with them. So
that's great. Well, we have so many questions. I want to kind of continue to get some of these questions answered for everybody. Some are kind of investment related. We may have touched on some of them, but like, for example, when you're looking for a solution to a defined problem, it may be limiting. And sometimes, an approach is to exploit new technologies to enable services which haven't even been thought of. And so this is a little bit of an investment question, but do you ever come across emerging technologies that maybe don't fit a defined need for the government or for your utility partners that you say, wow, this is really cool, and we're going to explore something that's maybe new to the world or beyond what you normally do?
All the time.
Go ahead.
I was to say, yeah, this happens all the time, and it is the reason why we have two types of investments that we make. One is in actual technology modification efforts, and then the other is in doing sort of an angel investment or a seed stage investment, so that we are, paying attention. It's an area that we believe is important or will be very important for the intelligence community in the next 5 to 10 years. And so we make the investment out of our proceeds or some of the revenue that's been generated from our prior investments. And we do a lot of these every year now. And what's been really, what's proved out the concept that this is worthwhile for us is that oftentimes the government will in 5 or 10 years come to us and say, hey, we were thinking that we might want to start looking at these types of technologies. And we'll say, oh, that's really perfect because we invested in one of these companies several years ago because we knew it was going to be coming online later.
That's great. And is Swati, I assume the same for you. You nodded your head
earlier.
Yeah,
same thing. I gave you the example of the AI company. And the AI company wasn't stemmed out of a need that we got from the business unit. It was our hypothesis that this would be needed because we knew from other sectors it's going to be needed. And so we invested with a high level of support, but not a detailed engagement plan. Also, I mentioned I led an innovation board of Horizon 3 areas. Most of the time, our business units aren't looking at Horizon 3 areas. So we have done a couple of those engagements and investments that we know down the line would be very consequential.
That's great. So, and then I'm going to paraphrase some of the questions that came in, but what happens when startups are no longer strategic, with the investment, or you can't find that fit? I mean, there's a lot of questions around the potential strategic impact and a collaboration that could be considered, but and I know sometimes these things take a long time, but what do you? I guess the question is, when there's not a formal partnership in place or a POC doesn't work out, how do you manage the portfolio company?
We certainly have our Next Growth Alliance effort. So we have, the network and we can introduce the startup to that network. And then sometimes if we get a success with another utility, we can showcase that, say, should we be looking at this? But we try to go to, there was probably at the time of investment, a planned engagement, but what will happen if that didn't work out? Over time, we found things emerge. So they're still in the portfolio. We don't have an engagement, but a new need emerges. And
so it kind of goes back to the patience.
Yeah,
great.
I mean, we continue to work with the startup outside the company because we can through Next Growth Alliance, and other things emerge. So the business development manager who's assigned to the company, continues throughout the life of the company with that startup, and so they're constantly thinking of opportunities of how we could engage.
All right. Well, so thanks for that, and so there's kind of maybe 3 more things I really want to cover in about 15 minutes to go. One of them is metrics and performance, and how do you measure success? And I'd love to hear from each of you about what your success metrics are, and kind of what are the key things that you measure. So Swati, you're want to go first with that?
Yeah, as I was saying, our success metrics always start with is a company getting financial return, and do we have a plan for strategic value capture? We constantly measure that and see where we are with that. Is 80% of the portfolio engaged? Okay. Beyond that, right, we look at the number of companies we bring in. So introductions, review, how many companies we review, and as Adria said, that could be like thousands of companies. How many get through so it's the innovation pipeline, right? How many get through introduction and into some kind of engagement and investment? We look at metrics like operational efficiency gained by engaging with that startup. How many dollars did it save? How much efficiency did we gain? How much future business or revenues opportunities come from that startup? So how many POCs, how many pilots, how many deployments? So we look at all of those metrics on an aggregate level for the whole portfolio.
Okay, that's great. And Adria, how about metrics for your group?
Yeah, very, very similarly. We first, I think at the outset of the contracts, we align across all the stakeholders about what we believe success should be. In this case, I think when a startup delivers a technology that's been modified and the US government has taken it out and tested it, we do view that as a measurable success metric of a pilot. And then as it gets modified further and the USG actually incorporates it into their workflows, demonstrates continued use, or purchases more licenses, puts the company on a contract, we call that an adoption, and we measure those as well. And to date, I believe our portfolio has about a 40% adoption rate over the past 25 years. And while we could just stick to those, and pilots and adoptions are our success, there is a third thing that isn't as easily quantifiable, which is the impact. And I think that the impact to mission of the national security community is what drives our workforce here at In-Q-Tel. And that is where that part is the hardest part, I think, to do in a prescribed way, so to speak, but ultimately it comes down to us maintaining very close ties with the end users of these technologies to gather from them over time what were the impacts of these investments. Internally, these stories are of great value and are the strongest examples of why our model is sound. They're the examples of where the rubber meets the road and what it really does. And so that piece is extremely important around here, but not quite as quantifiable.
So can you clarify the distinction between impact and adoption?
Yes. So, for example, perhaps we invested in a data analysis tool that is being used by analysts, and it's been adopted by a team of 100 analysts, and that's how many licenses are out there. That's the adoption. But then the impact is that for every one of those analysts, something that would have taken them 100 hours takes them a fraction of a second to get done because of this technology.
Yeah, that's great. And so, given your success metrics, I guess the other question I have is, how do you communicate about your adoption, about your success, about the work you're doing, and how it actually adds value to your key stakeholders? What methods or communication processes do you do? How often? Kind of, it seems like that's a big part of your role as well.
Yes.
Swati, or who wants to go first?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
So I think it's our I think internally we communicated a lot, and most of these impact stories, at least in the case of IQT, are classified, and so they have to be shared within, secure facilities and such. So, but there are also some impact stories that we are able to share openly, and we try to do that as much as possible, whether through our events, or our marketing and communications team is very active. So on LinkedIn, et cetera, putting out podcasts and revealing as much as we can, because we're so proud of the impact, but it's not as easy as just doing an annual report of
Yeah,
stories or impact, because we cannot share it, or else it might compromise the whole thing. So
sure. Okay. Swati, anything to add on
Yeah,
that?
similar. I mean, we communicated a lot internally. We also have a marketing and communications team that does a lot of that communication. We have regular executive sessions, our executive council, as well as the business unit heads, where we communicate that. Each business unit knows what they've done, what we've done for them. Um, so I think and we try to make it very visible, obviously, because that's the value that we bring. How we hear back on that is we are rated annually by our top executives. They get a survey on how we're doing. They mark us, they grade us on the value capture. We also get graded by our startup CEOs on how much value we're adding them, and that impacts our performance and compensation. So
Okay, that's
yeah.
great. Well, we're covering a lot of ground here. There's more questions. I I guess I don't think I can get to all of them. Maybe an area to focus on is, what's your one piece of advice that you would give to folks that they're trying to establish or optimize a portfolio development or a platform function? And I think that's a good way to kind of bring things towards closure here. So who'd like to go first?
so I think one piece of advice. So from my perspective, all of our investments are partnerships. Our goal as a partner to the startup is to help them be successful, help them create sophisticated products, be able to raise money, generate revenue, et cetera. And for the US government, our goal as a partner is to help them get technologies that they wouldn't have been able to get any other way, that actually work in their workflows, which are inherently difficult to insert outside technologies into, and then deliver mission impact. And I think to drive value with these investments, it's vital not just to set the investments in motion and pray, like I may have mentioned earlier, but just never losing sight of what the end goal is, and making sure that there's somebody or some function who is working as that flexible glue in the middle of it all, and is the advocate for the goal of the program. In the center of that relationship between the startup and the customer, I think is the one thing that I think is critical.
Okay, that's great. Swati, how about you? What's your piece
Yeah,
of advice?
I would say if you're designing a corporate venture team, really think about how you can get the strategic value capture, because it's not just the investment. And so if to create a platform team, the company needs resources. And I realize not all companies have the same resources that you can put in. But if you have the resources, I would really look at creating a platform team as a differentiator, because ultimately that's going to be the strategic value capture, and elevate that team to the level of the investors, right? So much like you have investment partners, you can have platform partners or business development partners. We've done that. We've taken a lot of time to make a business development team and Next Growth Alliance team that sits at the same level as the investors. And I saw one of the questions here saying, how are you different from other CVCs? And I would say that is a difference, the structure, right? That the business development part of it is equally, if not more important than the investment. And that shows in our culture. And that has been how we've succeeded with the company. So I'll leave it, and then hire those people from the best, pioneering corporates that have done this before, Intel Capital, many others who have done this so successfully. So I would say elevating the role of the platform.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I would just, kind of, wrap up by saying that I think the impact that a corporate venture development or portfolio success role has is to a large degree, something that is additive to the investment activity that becomes a crucial part of actually having the capability to consistently add value from the startups that you engage with. And so, if you want to talk about, attach rates and, the impact that you're having, you're an accelerator for that value across the organizations and maintaining that flexibility and that glue. And so this has been great. There's been tons of questions. We tried to answer as many as we can. I think I can say, I believe Adria and Swati are on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out, you can certainly reach out to me. These are topics that we cover in the GCV Institute's courses. And we'd be happy to talk with you about, more of those best known methods that we follow. For me personally, it's been, just fascinating to see how much this whole space has changed over the years. 20 years ago, it was almost unheard of to have a portfolio development team. Now we see that it's grown to about 40% that have them in the latest Keystone data. And, I think whether they have a formalized team or not, having these processes in place for, managing that scalable, systematic, consistent engagement with the startups that you work with and with the business groups or agencies or your alliance, the far-flung regions of your organization and business groups is super important. I'm just so pleased that we've had this time with Swati and Adria to share some of their advice and their insights. In all the courses that we teach at the Institute, this is, this engagement interaction with our guest experts and our mentors in the courses is key. And I think you've just demonstrated some of the tip of the iceberg things. And I wish we had more time to go into some of the nitty gritty, gory details of some of these things. But, at a very high level, you guys have painted a real picture of how important this engagement is, how you measure it, how you communicate it. And we appreciate your time. And I'll just take just a couple minutes to share a few things in terms of wrap up, if I can again, thank our panelists and, kind of where we have other opportunities for engagements with the Global Corporate Venturing Network. But again, thanks for Swati and Adria. And let's see here if I can say we've got some other learning opportunities coming up. For anybody who's focused on generative AI in the world, that's one of the things that is a very hot topic today. On February 7th, we'll talk about how investors can navigate the regulatory hurdles that are occurring. And then after that, if your heart is leaning into venture building and how to avoid the common failures, you're going to love this on Valentine's Day on February 14th. A webinar about venture building and how to avoid failures. And we've got a number of courses coming up. Landing the Value of Corporate Venturing is kind of our hallmark cornerstone course that we offer from the Institute that involves a very immersive learning experience, along with a structured mentor program to get into the guts of this corporate venture landing the value, value delivery process. And we did get a lot of questions that we didn't answer about investment programs and kind of how you define your investment thesis, how you structure your program, what you invest in, investment committee approvals, and those kinds of things. And the best practices, cultivated from decades of experience in establishing and operating high-performing corporate venture teams is all covered in our investment programs, which we have both live online to support the various geographies around the world, as well as some in-person courses coming up. We also have a number of in-person events scheduled. Namely the biggest of those, the GCVI Summit in Monterey in March. We hope to see many of you there. And then not long after that in London. But, we operate globally. We have events globally throughout the world, India and Indiana. So how about that? And if you need to get in touch with us, Liz Arrington and myself are available here with the Institute. You can find us on the GCV Institute website. And we hope to see you in an upcoming course or event and maybe do some deals together. If you're working to help support your portfolio companies with their success, this is an exciting time to be involved in corporate venture and the innovation economy. So with that, we'll wrap up and thank you and wish you all a great day.